The Nine of Swords is an unpleasant card, of which is known as cruelty. This is not necessarily cruelty towards another, but the aspect of our mind acting with cruelty and disruption to our own space up in our world. Therefore, the disruption and chaos present in the Swords cards is reaching here something of a crescendo. On the Rider-Waite card, we can see the character has woken from what appears to be a nightmare. There is an image at the end of their bed of people fighting and in conflict with one another. Of course, to be in a nightmare is to be in a world where our own mind torments us and forces us to come face to face with fearful and horrifying worlds, of which, when we awake, such as the character has done here, will have a knock-on effect to our day, because we're going to be tired and irritable because we haven't had a good night's sleep, and so our mind has actually worked against us. And so the foundation of our day is one set from that night's sleep before, which wasn't very good, and our day to come, henceforth, will be disrupted because of it. This is what we see on the Tree of Life here on this card as well. It's Yesod in that world of Yetzirah, the world of formation, and Yesod is essentially the foundation upon which God has built the world. It's the world that is set down for the plants to grow in, if you like, the soil that our botany takes place in. And it's also quite low down on the Tree of Life, and so we've come a long way from that pure light of Kether at the top, and so we've been formed in some way by our subconscious and our instinct and all that type of thing. We're not operating on our highest mind, and so our foundation has worked against us like that nightmare. We've set ourselves up for a fall because we have found in our world things to antagonise us, give ourselves headaches, don't sleep well, our thoughts are working against us, and so our actual foundation for the day isn't in the place it should be. Astrologically, we are Mars in Gemini. These are rather difficult to fit together in that Mars is of course connected with passion and drive, and can actually be quite single-minded and targeted in that respect. It will go for the goals, and of course can also be, as a planet of war, associated with becoming quite fired up and perhaps even over passionate in regards to that, whereas Gemini of course is duality. It's much more scattered in its energy and looks at things on that different paths, such as we saw on the previous card, and so put together we see a great conflict, and we can see that people of whom are Mars in Gemini astrologically are said to be prone to anger, for example. And of course it's important that we are all capable of becoming angry and getting fired up when need be, but one who has a problem with anger, for example, of whom uses words very negatively towards others, again, we are cruelty here in this card. To act in a cruel way towards others often represents the mind acting in a cruel way to ourselves as well. And interestingly, Yesod here on the Tree of Life is ruled by the moon, and the moon leads to a passive energy, allowing that anger to bubble forth, so that element of Mars to overpower the other signs of which we see in this card, such as Gemini and in fact the moon. So just like the character having nightmares on the Rider-Waite card would be irritable and tired throughout the day because their mind had worked against them, the person of whom is cruel towards us often will have their own mind acting in a cruel way to them, and they are reacting and putting forth an energy based on the foundation of their state of consciousness. And so essentially it's not us that is the problem. It is something in us of which reflects something in their consciousness. The images perhaps seen in the nightmares, the torments of the mind, of which makes them become overpowered with this fired up, angry emotion, and it spills forth and is taken out on those around them because of the passive energy that we see here symbolised by the moon doesn't rein it in. We need to rein in and understand those emotions, or they will actually work against us. And so we see that on the card. The swords are poisoned thoughts. As we can see, they are actually dripping with poison, and they are also red and rusty and damaged. These are not swords that you would want to take into a battle with you. The red and the rust is Mars and the aggression and the general unpleasantness there of a situation of war and of torment. The cards representing poisoned thoughts, of course, would poison anybody of whom came into contact with them. If we were to take hold of this sword, which is poisoned, we would become poisoned as well, and if we attacked somebody with it, they would become poisoned. No good could come from these swords. And we can see at the bottom of the cards is a symbol of blood, and so the poison changes into blood, or more specifically, where the poison ends, the blood begins. And so what this shows is that if we follow the path of this poison down through the card to its conclusion, it ends up in actual harm. And so the conclusion of this sphere of cruelty, this sphere of attacking ourselves and even others as well, is just going to end up in harm, in destruction. The blood doesn't have to be physical blood, but it could be essentially, and yet it could also be the blood of our soul, the blood of our nightmares. We have hurt ourselves mentally and even physically. It could represent, this blood, a bleeding of the spirit, a poisoned mind, which of course is concerned with pain and of suffering, and therefore what we put out is going to be pain and suffering. In that respect, our mind really would have been literally working against us, because we focus on that pain and suffering, and in the end we bring more of it into our lives, and so we focus on the things of which our mind is tormenting us with, and we end up having our entire waking mind filled with those horrible things as well. The idea with this being in Gemini as well can say that we can't make the choice to get out of it, and so we slip back into the nightmare because we're unable to figure out, as we saw before, which way to go. And it ends up with what Crowley called in the Book of Thoth the automatic stirring of heartless passion. So we're not even giving any conscious thought to it, we're just allowing ourselves to become constantly more damaged by this heartless passion, of which people, we can see today, perhaps more than ever, dedicating hours and years of their lives to a heartless passion, a often completely fruitless endeavour, of which just ends up, as we follow those strands of poison, into the harming of them and the others around them. And so to draw this card asks us to look at those swords and see them as those things in our mind, perhaps the shadow of regret, of guilt, of our weaknesses of which show up in those nightmares. It's something really that only you will know, because you know what hurt you the most. You, and only you, know the true face of that worry and despair and fear of which keeps you up at night. And truly, when you get this card, it's saying, yes, you have this situation going on, and it's not very good, is it? So we need to find a way to get out of the situation. And we have to, for example, understand that these are images in our head, or that they are reflections from the world around us, and not necessarily the truth of what our true experience actually is. By obsessing and overthinking and continuing to take hold of these poisoned swords, will only make things worse for ourselves by turning our hand against us, by taking hold of something that hurts us, for example. And so there is the key. We need to let go of those poisoned swords, turn away from them now and forever, and look for a way to repair any damage of which they have done to us and those around us.